The phone buzzed relentlessly in my pocket, yanking me from deep concentration. I stepped outside the makeshift clinic, wiping sweat from my brow as the harsh midday sun cast long shadows across the rural village. When I glanced at the screen, my stomach instantly knotted. Richard. After years dealing with my stepfather's manipulative nature, I almost declined the call. His communications rarely brought anything positive. Yet something, perhaps misplaced hope, made me answer. I kept my voice neutral as I greeted him, unprepared for the bombshell he was about to drop. With shocking casualness, Richard informed me he'd sold my mountain cabin. My sanctuary. My refuge. Gone, liquidated to settle his gambling debts. His laughter echoed through the phone as he mentioned it was for the greater good, his own, obviously. I felt the blood drain from my face, then rush back with burning intensity. The cabin wasn't just property. It represented my safe haven, the place I'd poured countless hours into making perfect. Those mountain views had witnessed my joys, comforted my sorrows, restored my spirit after exhausting humanitarian missions. Now Richard discussed selling it as casually as discarding unwanted furniture. My name is Catherine. For as long as I can remember, Richard has shadowed my existence with his selfishness. My mother married him when I was 15, charmed by his wit and apparent warmth. Beneath that facade lurked a man perpetually prioritizing his interests above everyone else's. When I challenged his right to sell what wasn't his, he dismissed my concerns with infuriating nonchalance. He claimed he'd been managing things while I was playing hero abroad. According to his twisted logic, a property I rarely visited served better purpose covering his debts. He actually expected gratitude for this betrayal. My fury erupted. I ended the call before hearing more self-justification, then paced frantically outside the clinic, struggling to process this violation. Richard had crossed boundaries before, but nothing approaching this magnitude. Yet amid my anger flickered something like satisfaction. Richard remained unaware of one crucial detail. The cabin wasn't solely mine to sell. My best friend Laura co-owned the property, and our legal agreement explicitly required both signatures for any sale transaction. This battle was far from finished. I wouldn't let Richard's betrayal stand. Not this time. Collapsing onto my cot, I stared at my phone, replaying Richard's smug tone repeatedly in my mind. The audacity stunned me. How could anyone consider it acceptable to dispose of someone else's beloved property without permission? The cabin represented far more than timber and land. Those walls held my heritage, my history. Summers spent chasing fireflies with my mother before her remarriage. The peaceful retreat that anchored me after her passing. The one constant when everything else seemed uncertain. Richard felt no such attachment, viewing it merely as another exploitable resource, like everything else he'd interfered with over the years. This wasn't some minor favor or inconvenience. This represented my home, my sanctuary, my peace of mind. I immediately contacted Laura, explaining Richard's unbelievable action. Years of friendship meant she understood instantly what this cabin represented to me. After expressing appropriate shock and outrage, Laura reminded me of our co-ownership agreement's protection. She volunteered to retrieve all relevant documentation while I completed my volunteer assignment. We would confront this situation together upon my return. A strange calm settled over me after our conversation. Richard assumed his geographical advantage made me powerless against his betrayal. He severely miscalculated. I wasn't the intimidated teenager who once tolerated his bullying tactics. I'd grown into a resourceful adult with connections, knowledge, and understanding of legal protections. Richard's self-satisfied victory celebration would prove premature. The subsequent days passed in a whirlwind as I completed my humanitarian assignment. Despite immersing myself in work, thoughts of Richard's betrayal lingered constantly. I couldn't shake the image of him gloating over settling debts at my expense, treating my sanctuary like a convenient ATM machine. During a quiet evening, I turned to my travel journal, my faithful companion on every journey. Writing helped organize my chaotic thoughts, providing needed clarity. As my pen moved across pages, memories flooded back. First visiting the cabin with Mom, restoration projects with Laura, peaceful evenings beside crackling fires when time seemed suspended. This structure wasn't merely timber and nails. It represented a fundamental part of my identity. Richard thought he could auction it off like casino chips. He would soon discover his miscalculation. Laura's research confirmed our legal position. The co-ownership agreement explicitly invalidated any unauthorized sale. County records showed no official transfer of ownership, suggesting Richard attempted an under-the-table transaction, typical of his shortcut-seeking approach to life. The solution appeared straightforward. I would complete my assignment, return home, and address this situation directly. My approach wouldn't involve emotional outbursts. That's precisely what Richard expected and knew how to manipulate. Instead, I'd utilize what he consistently underestimated, my strategic thinking capacity. His perceived victory would disintegrate once confronted with legal reality. Upon arriving home, I immediately sensed something wrong. The property's usual tranquility felt corrupted somehow. Inside, neglected houseplants, accumulated mail, and an empty refrigerator awaited me. Setting down my luggage, I felt the weight of impending confrontation settling firmly on my shoulders. Richard called just minutes after my arrival, his voice dripping with fake cheer and condescension. He inquired whether I'd adjusted to reality, yet suggesting I shouldn't be upset over spilled milk regarding the cabin. His cavalier attitude regarding something so precious to me reinforced my determination. I informed him calmly about my discovery. Ownership records showed no completed sale. The co-ownership agreement with Laura invalidated his unauthorized transaction. The property remained legally ours despite his actions. Richard's momentary silence spoke volumes before his voice returned with noticeable tension. He insisted the sale was finalized, paperwork completed, cash payment received. My correction clearly struck a nerve. When I repeated the legal facts, that he lacked authority to sell without Laura's consent, his reaction shifted from confidence to desperate antagonism. He questioned my intelligence, portrayed himself as victim, claimed I couldn't understand his struggles. When he suggested I should appreciate his effort to solve problems, my patience vanished. I clearly identified his action as theft, rejected his self-serving narrative, and emphasized he alone would face consequences for his decisions. Our conversation ended abruptly. Standing motionless afterward, phone clutched tightly, I experienced mingled anger and triumph. For years, I'd allowed Richard to manipulate situations, induce guilt, and exploit my patience. No longer. This confrontation extended beyond property rights. I was reclaiming personal boundaries, self-respect, and peace of mind after years of manipulation. The following morning, I reviewed Laura's documentation thoroughly. Our co-ownership agreement contained unmistakable language. Neither party could sell without the other's written consent. Richard's actions weren't merely unethical. They constituted blatant legal violations. Richard arrived unexpectedly at my door, entering uninvited with his characteristic entitlement. His attempted justification followed predictable patterns, claiming desperate circumstances, reframing theft as borrowing, promising future repayment once his luck improved. His transparent manipulation techniques might once have confused my response, but now I recognized them instantly. When challenged about repeatedly poor gambling outcomes, he deflected by suggesting I overreacted about property I rarely visited. This dismissive attitude toward something precious to me crystallized my resolve. I reminded him the cabin represented my home, my values, my choices, not his to dispose of conveniently. Furthermore, Laura valued it equally, making his unauthorized sale legally invalid. Mentioning potential legal consequences visibly unsettled him. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, Richard departed without a clever retort or manipulative parting shot. This unprecedented retreat revealed an important truth. His power existed primarily through my acceptance of it. By refusing to participate in his manipulation, I fundamentally changed our dynamic. Following Richard's abrupt departure, I implemented a comprehensive strategy. I gathered overwhelming evidence, co-ownership documentation, Richard's incriminating messages, statements from involved parties. The real estate agent, clearly uncomfortable with her unwitting role, confirmed Richard's signed documentation alone and admitted the buyer hadn't completed payment after she flagged the suspicious transaction. This information strengthened my position enormously. Richard had calculated my reaction based on past patterns, expecting emotional outbursts he could dismiss or passive acceptance of his dominance. My methodical, legally sound response represented something entirely outside his experience with me. With Laura's assistance, I prepared a formal cease and desist letter with unambiguous language. Any further attempts to claim cabin ownership or engage the buyer would trigger immediate legal action. For years, Richard manipulated and intimidated others successfully, but now faced opposition he couldn't charm or bully his way through. Seeing the fraudulent sale documentation with Richard's signature crystallized my resolve. He hadn't merely stepped over boundaries. He'd obliterated them completely, demonstrating profound disrespect for my autonomy and property rights. I contacted local law enforcement with comprehensive evidence. Detective Miller confirmed the unauthorized nature of the transaction and offered to initiate formal investigation. I agreed without hesitation. Law enforcement contacted the buyer, clarifying the property's co-ownership status and obtaining their cooperation. The cabin officially remained under Laura's and my ownership, though the case would proceed to address Richard's fraudulent actions. When asked whether I wanted to press charges, I didn't hesitate. Years of tolerating Richard's manipulations had created patterns he believed inviolable. Breaking these patterns required decisive action with real consequences. Richard's desperate communication attempts followed predictable patterns: anger, accusations, guilt manipulation. He portrayed himself as victim, characterized me as ungrateful, claiming he'd intervened when my mother struggled. My perspective had fundamentally shifted, however. I recognized his historical pattern of control masquerading as assistance. His actions represented manipulation, not support; exploitation, not care. I rejected further engagement, directing all communication through legal channels. This boundary, perhaps more than any other action, demonstrated our relationship's permanent transformation. Richard's days manipulating me had concluded. I finally controlled our interactions. 2 days later came official confirmation. The buyer halted the transaction upon learning about co-ownership complexities. The cabin remained securely Laura's and mine. For the first time in weeks, I experienced genuine tranquility. Beyond securing property, I'd established boundaries Richard couldn't circumvent or ignore. I shared this victory with Laura immediately. Her observation resonated deeply. It's about time someone confronted him. For years, I'd tolerated Richard's manipulations, entitlement, and boundary violations as somehow inevitable. This successful resistance marked a pivotal transformation in my approach toward Richard and toward life generally. Visiting the cabin afterward proved emotionally overwhelming. The familiar scent of wooden panels, the distinctive creaking floorboards, the peaceful mountain atmosphere, all reminded me why this place held such profound significance. Sitting beside the fireplace, surrounded by mountain tranquility, I recognized this space represented my history, where memories formed, milestones celebrated, serenity found amid life's chaos. For the first time, I smiled genuinely. This victory transcended property reclamation. It represented reclaiming personal identity after years under Richard's manipulative shadow. A week later came formal confirmation. Richard faced charges of fraudulent misrepresentation and attempted property theft. Court proceedings would follow, supported by substantial evidence. This news evoked complex emotions: relief, vindication, even slight sadness for what our family relationship could have been under different circumstances. Detective Miller noted my strength throughout this challenging situation. Confronting family, particularly someone as manipulative as Richard, demanded courage many people lack. This acknowledgement validated my difficult decision to prioritize justice over false harmony. I reflected quietly afterward on recent developments. Richard had exerted significant influence throughout my life, albeit toxic influence, and now I'd freed myself from his manipulation patterns. This liberation represented more than legal victory. It signified personal transformation. Laura and I celebrated at the cabin, raising glasses on the porch overlooking spectacular mountain vistas. The crisp air carried pine scents as we toasted restoration and boundary setting. Our conversation revealed how much this ordeal taught me about myself. I'd spent years avoiding conflict, particularly with Richard, always prioritizing harmony over justice. Standing firm this time marked a fundamental shift in my self-perception. The cabin symbolized more than property. It represented everything I'd built, everything I'd earned through personal effort and dedication. Never again would I allow anyone to deprive me of what rightfully belonged to me, whether property or personal dignity. Sitting beside the fireplace that evening, I experienced peace unknown for years. Richard's betrayal had challenged me unexpectedly, but revealed strength I hadn't previously recognized in myself. The cabin remained secure, my boundaries firmly established, my autonomy respected. For the first time in memory, I felt genuinely in control of my life's direction. Life established new patterns in subsequent weeks. The cabin transformed from battleground back into sanctuary. Every creaking floorboard, every rustling leaf outside reminded me what I'd successfully defended against exploitation. Richard's communications ceased entirely after formal charges appeared. My mother called once, attempting her standard defense of his behavior, but even she recognized its hollowness this time. When she expressed hope I'd find peace, I could truthfully confirm I already had. Laura and I invested weekends completing small cabin renovations, repainting, repairing, planting. Each improvement represented reclaiming more than physical space. I was reclaiming self-determination after years surrendering it to maintain false peace. Watching sunset from the porch one evening, Laura asked about my future plans now that I'd reclaimed the cabin and confronted Richard. The answer emerged with surprising clarity. I would continue pursuing my passions, volunteering, traveling, living authentically, but with one crucial difference. Nobody else would dictate my choices or diminish my achievements again. Reflecting on lessons from this experience, I recognized its significance extended beyond property rights, or even Richard specifically. This confrontation revealed my capacity for establishing clear boundaries and maintaining them regardless of pressure or manipulation. The cabin stood as physical testament to that growth, daily reminding me that preserving personal peace and values needn't involve surrendering to others' inappropriate demands. As sunlight faded behind mountain peaks one evening, I stood breathing cool, pine-scented air on my porch. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, I felt completely at home, not just within these cherished wooden walls, but within myself.